The emergency session began with a lie dressed as procedure. Under the vaulted prism of the Galactic Harmonics Council, where translated light turned every delegation into stained glass ghosts, the Thesari arrived in ceremonial armor and occupied a third of the speaking floor before anyone granted them the right. Their scale made that easier. A standing Thesari officer was nearly 3 meters at the shoulder, plated in obsidian keratin with throat sacs that amplified speech into courtroom thunder. High Commander Spencer stood at their center beneath the war standard of the Spear Ascendant and waited for silence, as if silence were tribute. It came. Council Moderator Tal Ray of the Scholars of Lum activated the emergency docket with visible reluctance. By petition of the Thesari Primacy, Item 1. Publication of the Revised Species Threat Ledger for Strategic Harmonization Review. Spencer's crest flared deep crimson, the Thesari sign for triumphant disdain. "Read it in full," he said. "Let the chamber hear what danger truly sounds like." A hollow column rose from the floor, transparent and terrible in its bureaucracy. Species names spiraled by threat tier, annotated with military tolerances, coercion thresholds, and projected compliance curves. Murmurs thickened as delegates found themselves quantified like weather. When the list reached human entries, translation bands flashed amber, then red, then amber again. Tier 2. Low tactical hazard. Human polities, Terran sphere. Tier Omega. Civilizational catastrophe potential. Human polities, Terran sphere. For 3 seconds, the chamber was perfectly still. Then Thesari delegates laughed in synchronized pulses, a barking rhythm that made smaller species flinch. Spencer extended one claw toward the second listing. "A clerical anomaly," he declared. "A sentimental fiction written by prey species who frighten themselves with stories of tool apes and miracles. We preserve it only as a museum piece of administrative panic." He leaned forward, voice widening to fill the hall. "These humans are petitioners, children with shipping contracts. They confuse trade law with power projection and believe memory is a substitute for strength." A Valere elder in slate robes clicked her mandibles in dismay. 2 seats away, the merchants of Pax sealed their data slates and stopped making eye contact with anyone. Everyone in the chamber had seen the Thesari absorb 6 border systems in 14 years and relabel them as stability acquisitions. Everyone knew what followed resistance. Military governors, levy quotas, recruitment drafts, then silence. Moderator Tal Ray tried to reclaim formality. "The ledger is advisory. Publication without consensus breaches." "Breaches?" Spencer's laugh rolled like artillery. "We are discussing classifications, not law. Do not tremble at ink." He swept his arm, and the display shifted from numbers to imagery. Human convoys escorting famine relief. Human salvage crews stabilizing a cracked station spindle. Human marines in white helmets carrying civilians through smoke. Every frame selected for mockery. "These are your supposed hidden terrors," Spencer said. "Observe the primitive softness. Observe the species that negotiates while armed, apologizes while advancing, and calls this virtue. We call it appetite without courage." A Thesari delegate from the rear tier hissed into his amplifying band, not waiting for recognition. "Children, petitioners, tool apes with paperwork." Several delegations winced, but none objected on the record. The Thesari had chosen their audience well. Anxious neutrals, indebted clients, and a handful of old allies, too weakened to defend anyone else. Ambassador Elena Ward stood at the Terran lectern without moving. Her suit was plain charcoal, her insignia minimal, her expression attentive enough to be misread as passive by those who had never watched human diplomacy under pressure. She took notes by hand rather than slate, a habit that unsettled alien analysts because they could not scrape paper. Spencer turned directly toward her. Ambassador Ward, you have now witnessed objective strategic truth. Your kind sits in the lower tiers where it belongs. Any second listing is mythology. We are merciful enough to announce this publicly so your people do not embarrass themselves by misinterpreting our patients. Ward inclined her head. Your statement is recorded. Good, Spencer said. Then record this as well. The Thesari Primacy will conduct a corrective procession through Memorial Orbit 19 over Valari Prime to demonstrate that your sanctuaries are decorative and your objections are ceremonial. He spread his claws as if offering a gift. If humans are truly dangerous, as your fearful friends whisper, they may answer. By the third hour of the emergency session, external feeds confirmed the procession had already begun. The chamber's central hollow reconfigured to live tactical telemetry. 2. Thesari Dreadlances and 12 escort claws entered the protected ring where Valarii dead from the glass famine were interred in drifting crystal reliquaries. It was one of the oldest ratified sanctuaries in Council law, a zone every military had agreed to transit under silent drive and disarmed posture. The Thesari ran active engines, weapon ports open, formation drums broadcasting triumph chants across civilian frequencies. On Valari Prime, funeral bells started ringing in every city. A junior delegate from the Avians of Kith rose in shaking outrage. This is desecration under observation. The Council must censure, impound, sanction. Spencer did not look at him. Sit. The Avian sat. Ward watched the telemetry with the same calm she had used while Spencer mocked her species. What changed was so slight, most observers missed it. Her pen stopped moving. She placed it horizontally on the desk, perfectly aligned with the edge, and transmitted a single encrypted packet through the Terran mission channel. In sole command, that packet reached Fleet Admiral Victoria Anderson in 17 seconds. Anderson stood over a circular tactical table while Earth rotated below the command station viewport, blue and white and deceptively gentle. Around her, civilian and military staff shared one operations floor without partitions. That architectural choice had once been ridiculed by foreign attachés as evidence of human naivete. It now meant supply planners, trauma coordinators, cyber defense teams, and fleet tacticians heard the same warning in the same instant and began moving as one organism. Council feed is public, said Colonel Thomas Miller from Strategic Analysis. Thesari rhetoric has crossed from intimidation into ritual provocation. Memorial violation confirmed. Valari channels requesting intervention, but not naming us directly. They never would, Anderson said. Not until they believe asking us costs less than refusing the Thesari. Rear Admiral James Hayes arrived from fleet readiness with 3 tablets and a face that looked carved from old fatigue. Capri Junction traffic just shifted, he said. Commercial lanes thinning in a pattern that suggests pre-war insurance behavior. Somebody is paying very high premiums to vanish. Or somebody was told to clear the road, Mueller said. Hayes glanced up at the central display where Spencer's speech replayed in clipped excerpts. He wants us angry in public and clumsy in private. Anderson's reply came without heat. Then, we decline half his request. In a lower operations tier, Director Sophia Novak of Distributed Sustainment had already convened 12 civilian guild leads and 6 naval quartermasters. On her board, freight habitats, hospital tenders, and fabrication barges lit in steady green across 7 systems. Conversion packages remain sealed unless ordered, Novak said. If ordered, first wave turns 38 civilian hulls into depot nodes within 4 hours, second wave in 9. Medical throughput doubles with cooperative triage protocols. We do not improvise under fire, we execute what we rehearsed. A shipwright representative frowned. Publicly? Publicly, if needed, Novak said. Quietly, if preferred. Either way, steel arrives where crews are bleeding. 2 levels above, Commander Marcus Sullivan from Terran Cyberlinguistic Group stood with a team of historians, coders, and cultural analysts before a wall of the Sari doctrinal archives. Their specialty was unfashionable until wars began. Language as command architecture, ritual as vulnerability map. Honor net traffic is peaking, analyst Ingrid Bergman reported. They are sharing the council clip as morale theater. Sullivan nodded. Good. Pride compresses error correction. Keep parsing dual lexicons, lineage seals, urgency flags. Do not touch anything. I want perfect understanding before contact. You still think they route tactical authority through ceremonial channels? I think every empire hides its weak seam where it thinks no one beneath it can read. At the Terran diplomatic residence above Council Station, Ward moved from the chamber to a secure briefing room with ambassadorial guard detachment and 2 advisors from the Legal Warfare Office. Through the viewport, Council ships drifted in dignified arcs while Thesari military traffic carved straight lines through everything. Her senior aide, Charlotte Becker, handed over casualty reports from seized merchant crews. 7 confirmed alive in Thesari custody, 12 unverified, all taken from neutral registry hulls carrying Terran transponders. They are calling them contraband labor pending adjudication. Ward read each name before speaking. No one says pending adjudication by accident. They intend permanence. Becker hesitated. Do we file immediate protest? Ward gave a small, almost tired smile. Charlotte, we have filed immediate protest so often it has become a local weather pattern. She keyed an interlink and brought Anderson, Hayes, Novak, and Sullivan into a joint secure channel. Faces appeared in stacked windows, each frame carrying its own background noise. Bridge alarms, data chatter, the low hum of orbital machinery, the scratch of someone writing with an actual pencil. Ward summarized without embellishment. Spencer has publicly rejected parity frameworks, violated memorial protections, and seized civilian crews. He has also challenged response timing in open forum. His objective is to force a symbolic reaction before our legal basis matures. Hayes spoke first. He thinks we need spectacle. We need legitimacy, Ward corrected softly. And readiness. Novak tapped her slate. Readiness is not the bottleneck, Sullivan added. Understanding is almost there. Anderson looked from one window to the next, then back to Ward. What threshold do you want on record? Ward did not answer immediately. She looked out through the briefing room glass at the council complex, its great diplomatic rings shining with old promises and selective enforcement. When she turned back, her voice remained calm enough to sound gentle. Draft formal warning language, specific remedies, verified timelines, monitored compliance. We give them one final door that leads away from war. Hayes exhaled through his nose, a soldier's version of acceptance. And if he kicks the door off its hinges? Ward picked up her pen and aligned it with the desk edge exactly as she had done in the chamber. Then the second listing on his ledger stops being a joke and starts being documentation. Ward did not move her hand from the pen. Transmit on Council Open Band, authenticated Terran diplomatic channel and mirrored to neutral recorders. Full text. Charlotte Becker read it once, tightened 2 clauses, and sent it to the chamber feed, where no one could later claim mistranslation. Ambassador Elena Ward stood again beneath the prism light while delegates watched as if witnessing a sentence being handed down. Her voice carried without amplification, precise and unhurried. By authority of the Terran Sphere and in accordance with Harmonic's charter protections, ratified by every military signatory, humanity issues the following formal warning to the Thessari Primacy. You will withdraw all armed vessels from Memorial Orbit 19 immediately and restore sanctuary status. You will release all seized merchant crews held under contraband labor designations with independent medical verification. You will submit command representatives to monitored arbitration within 12 standard hours under neutral observation. She let the chamber settle around the words, then added the line Spencer had already heard once and chosen to ignore. For 2 centuries we have been patient. Do not mistake patience for inability. The moderator's sigil brightened as Tal Ray appended legal references in real time, trying to weld procedure to a room that preferred intimidation. Several neutral delegates opened compliance archives and began recording, a quiet signal that someone besides humans still cared what was written down before fleets fired. Spencer listened with his head tilted, as if she were reciting a children's lesson in proper table manners. When Ward finished, he did not answer her first. He turned to his own command broadcast node and patched the entire exchange into fleet entertainment channels. Across 100 Thessari hulls, mess decks erupted in barking laughter. "Observe," Spencer said, addressing his officers more than the council. "The petitioners have discovered punctuation. They threaten with deadlines now." His throat sac swelled, voice rolling like metal on stone. "Humans, you are children who build monuments because you cannot hold territory. You are tool apes who hide behind laws drafted by weaker species. You are clerks in uniforms, and clerks do not command outcomes in honest combat." He shifted back toward Ward, crest lifting in theatrical benevolence. "Your 12-hour demand is declined. Your arbitration is declined. Your sentiment regarding dead Valeri is noted and discarded. If you wish to reclaim your seized crews, come take them." Tal Ray attempted a censure motion and lost it before the call fully propagated. 5 delegations abstained out of fear, 7 out of debt, and 3 because they had convinced themselves neutrality meant silence while borders burned. Spencer raised one claw and issued his next order on open channels so every neutral state would hear the hierarchy of consequence. Dread, Lance's Vowbreaker and Crown of Ash advance from Memorial Ring to Velarii Protectorate boundary. Cross it under War Engine. Escort claws form spear geometry. Any interference, record, and erase. Gasps rippled through the chamber as telemetry updated. 2. Thessari capital hulls pivoted with predatory smoothness and drove out of sanctuary orbit in a blaze of active exhaust. Civilian traffic around Valeri Prime split in panic lines, transponders strobing requests for corridor priority that no one could grant fast enough. In Sol Command, the shared operations floor absorbed the update without raised voices. Admiral Victoria Anderson watched the Dreadlances cross the red treaty line on the tactical globe and waited until both signatures were undeniably inside Protectorate space. "Legal threshold?" she asked. Ward answered over secure link from Council Station. "Complete, unambiguous, recorded by neutral mirrors." "Civilian risk curve?" Novak answered first. "High if they continue inward. Logistics conversion can go live on your mark." Sullivan's window flashed with layered script and doctrinal glyphs. "HonorNet packets are peaking. They are celebratory and sloppy. I have structural map confidence above 92%. Hayes looked up from readiness reports. "Fleets are fueled. Wings are staged. Marines are loaded. We can meet them at Kipri or farther in, depending on what message we choose." Ward's expression did not change, but everyone on the channel felt the shift from argument to decision. Message 1 was delivered in language. Message 2 will be delivered in consequences. authorized defensive execution under Charter Article 17 and Valery Compact 12. Anderson nodded once. Granted. The orders moved outward in nested chains. Not dramatic, not shouted, just acknowledged and carried by professionals who had rehearsed this branch for years while being called timid by empires that confused noise with strength. Civilian fabrication barges received sealed conversion keys but no public broadcast. Hospital tenders altered routes toward projected casualty corridors. Freight habitats shed trade manifests and loaded repair lattices. Fleet groups in dispersed peacetime posture turned as one toward Kepri Hyperlane Junction. The old choke point every strategist pretended was obsolete until war returned and proved otherwise. Ward remained in the chamber long enough to place one final statement into council record. Let it be entered that humanity sought monitored arbitration and was refused. Let it be entered that sanctuary law was violated and civilians were seized. Let it be entered that response now proceeds under ratified defense compacts. She looked directly at Spencer. You wanted an answer already. You have one. She cut the channel before he could perform his next insult. At Capri, the star itself burned pale gold behind a mesh of relay structures, logistics moons, and defunct customs stations that had outlived 3 trade regimes. The Thesari doctrine marked the junction as ideal battle geometry, predictable lanes, clear vectors, and enough open space for ritual spear formations to break an opponent's center in a single humiliating push. Primus Captain Rask of the Dread Lance Vowbreaker stood in his command cradle and studied human dispositions with mounting satisfaction. The Terrans had deployed what looked like a thin defensive cordon, too few line ships for a decisive stand, and too many civilian signatures cluttering the outer approaches. Primitive traffic discipline, said his tactical adjutant. They left freight hulls in theater. Rask clicked approval. They always treat war like an evacuation drill. His fleet display highlighted 3 logistics moons behind the human line, rich with fuel silos and repair scaffolds. The Sari planning had named them tribute anchors. Crack those moons, force Terrans into emergency bargaining, extract guarantees in 48 hours. Spencer had promised the council the timeline personally. Rask opened a fleet-wide channel in formal combat cadence, the old language of dominance drilled into every officer from hatchling years. Cohorts of the Spear Ascendant, behold your opponent, petitioners and clerks. Their line is soft. Their command culture is timid. We strike once, cleanly, and they will ask us what terms they may keep. Maintain honor spacing, prioritize visible kills, and transmit every break in their formation to council public bands. Acknowledgements rolled back in proud, clipped bursts. Elite wings requested ritual duel assignments, eager to mark their hulls with human kills before the campaign had even formally begun. The first exchange looked exactly like the Sari simulations. Human outer pickets fired at long range and peeled away in disciplined withdrawal. 2 destroyers vented atmosphere from glancing hits and vanished behind relay clutter. A Terran cruiser rotated broadside to screen smaller craft, took a direct lance strike, and fell out of line trailing debris. Rask bared his teeth. There, pressure applied and they fold. He ordered full spear advance. The Sari formation surged through the junction in layered wedges, each commanded by lineage officers whose tactical authority doubled as religious credential. Drums beat in bridge compartments to lock cadence across cohorts. On open broadcast, the Sari commentators narrated the charge as proof that history remained obedient. Human ships kept retreating. Cowardice confirmed, said the adjutant. Rask narrowed his gaze. The retreat was orderly, perhaps too orderly, but he dismissed the irritation. Terrans always over-coordinated under stress. That was the story. The ledger said, low tactical hazard. The chamber had laughed. The galaxy expected the same ending it had seen with every smaller state that tried to use law against force. By the fourth attack pass, the human cordon had thinned into fragments. Capri's central lane opened like a wound. The sorry spearheads drove deeper, crossing marker buoys that had been dormant for decades and were now ignored as obsolete infrastructure. Then his rear screens flashed amber. Signal anomaly behind us, a systems officer reported. Multiple gravitic spikes, source unknown. Rask did not turn. Jamming. Negative. Objects are powering from cold state, hundreds. No, thousands. Across the junction, dead cargo hulks and abandoned customs buoys unfolded along hidden seams. What had looked like scrap skeletons became active lattice towers. Buried mass anchor mines woke in cascading sequence, each one igniting with a hard white pulse that bent local vectors and snapped the lane into segmented wells. The corridor closed behind the spear formations. Rask finally felt the first clean edge of uncertainty. Reform on me. Pull Cohort 3 back to bridge the gap. Cohort 3 cannot comply, said communications. They report anchor lock and vector drift. Their navigation thinks they are still in forward lane. That is not a sentence, Rask snarled. It is what they sent, Primus Captain. His tactical map fractured into isolated pockets. The sorry wedges that had entered Capri in ceremonial unity now drifted in separated gravity cells, line of sight broken by distorted space and relay wreckage. Command signals lagged, then duplicated, then arrived out of order. A recall code from one elite wing authenticated as genuine and absurdly urgent, pulling them out at the exact moment neighboring cohorts expected flanking fire. Rask's adjutant stared at the feed. Why would they disengage now? Another officer answered before Rask could. HonorNet packet. Dual challenge from superior lineage seal. They believed it binding. For 3 seconds, Rask heard only the drum cadence, still pounding from a compartment that had not yet understood the map had changed. Far ahead, human ships stopped retreating. They turned in synchronized arcs, not toward dual lines, but toward pre-computed cross-vectors that stitched the separated pockets into targeting geometry. Missile clouds blossomed from behind logistics hulls Rask had mocked as clutter. Civilian silhouettes split open and revealed magazine racks, repair drones, and mobile point defense arrays already feeding data to the line ships. The tool apes had brought freight to a war zone on purpose. Request fleet-level guidance from High Commander Spencer, Rask ordered. Queued, communications said. Transmission delay and interference from anchor field. Then transmit again. Already sending. On his far screen, one Thessari escort wing vanished under intersecting rail fire so dense it looked like a single line of white rain. Another cohort attempted a ritual turn and found its vector trapped against an artificial gravity wall. A third kept charging forward because its command relay had not received any update newer than 12 seconds, which, in a collapsing formation, was the difference between order and obituary. Rask understood too late that the human retreat had not been fear. It had been invitation. He opened a private channel to Crown of Ash, forcing calm into his voice because panic was contagious and pride was mandatory. We are in a shaped battle space. Repeat, shaped battle space. This is not a line break. This is a net. The reply came clipped and disbelieving. Humans do not build nets at this scale. Outside his viewport, another dormant marker buoy unfolded into a mass anchor spine and locked a fresh segment of lane. Human signatures multiplied where scanners had previously seen empty rock. New contacts emerged from asteroid shadow and disciplined files, hulls bearing Terran and compact partner transponders side by side. Rask watched his certainty crack and realized the ledger anomaly had never been clerical. It had been warning text. In Sol Command, Hayes studied the same fracture pattern and gave the order he had been holding in his throat since Ward aligned her pen in the chamber. All groups, execute Phase 1. Keep pressure distributed. No theatrics. Break spears into pockets and let them feel the weight of every assumption they brought with them. Around Kepre, human formations answered with quiet acknowledgments and moved to work. The first proof arrived as a maintenance tug. It drifted out from behind a gutted custom spindle with faded hazard stripes, registry paint half burned off, and a civilian beacon still broadcasting a salvage permit that had expired 11 years earlier. Rask dismissed it as debris until its hull split along magnetic seams and released a ring of autonomous tenders that snapped onto the wounded Terran cruiser he had watched take a lance strike minutes before. 3 drones sealed breaches. 2 fed fresh armor plates from internal racks. A spine-mounted fabricator unfolded and began printing replacement turret housings in bright, molten lines. On Rask's tactical display, the cruiser's status climbed from crippled to combat-capable in less than 7 minutes. False telemetry, he said. His systems chief checked twice, then swallowed. No falsification signature detected. Thermal bloom confirms active fabrication. They are repairing in theater. Across the pocketed battle space, more civilian silhouettes transformed. Freight habitats vented cargo pods, then rotated to expose nested ammunition carousels. Hospital tenders extended sensor masts and became triage command nodes, routing casualty shuttles through lanes that mass anchors had left clear by design. A convoy barge Rask had tagged as non-combatant rolled open and deployed point defense satellites in disciplined grids, knitting overlapping fire umbrellas around Terran destroyers. The pattern spread with mechanical calm, like a city-changing shift. On the Vowbreaker Bridge, drum cadence faltered. The Sari doctrine separated combat from support as a matter of honor and hierarchy. Logistics existed to follow victory, not manufacture it under direct fire. Officers stared as human, soft assets absorbed impacts, rerouted power, and returned damaged warships to line strength before the Thesari gunnery could capitalize. Rask keyed Fleet Command again. Crown of Ash, report your engagement axis. Static washed, then a strained voice answered. Axis does not hold. Terran auxiliaries are moving faster than our targeting updates. We strike a line ship. It disappears behind civilian hulls, then reappears with full shields and new escorts. They are not withdrawing damaged units. They are regrowing them. Rask muted the channel and turned to weapons. Concentrate on fabrication hulls. Strip their support. We are trying, the gunmaster replied. They are masking signatures with legal transponder clutter and emergency medical tags. Fire control keeps rejecting solutions as charter violations. A junior officer blurted, humans trained their combat systems to hesitate around civilian profiles. Rask's crest darkened. Then disable that hesitation manually. Manual cycling adds 6 seconds between volleys. 6 seconds was an eternity inside kill geometry designed by someone else. From a Terran relay ship hidden in the shadow of Kipri's third logistics moon, Director Sofia Novak watched the same map and spoke in a voice that never rose above conversational volume. Depot network is stable. Is conversion wave 1 complete? Release wave 2. Prioritize spindle sectors cobalt through hinge. Keep med corridors separate from munitions flow. No shortcuts. Her operations board answered with one-word acknowledgments from shipwright guildmasters, naval quartermasters, and civic dispatch coordinators who had spent a decade being told their drills were expensive theater. The rehearsals now unfolded in exact sequence. Fabrication barges printed rail slugs by the thousand and flung them toward forward magazines via drone trains that never stopped moving. Water recyclers on migrant habitats became coolant stations for overheated weapons arrays. Civilian traffic algorithms written for congestion pricing and storm evacuation rerouted war material through microlanes too narrow for Thesari capital hulls to exploit. Rear Admiral Hayes patched in from Sol Command, his face lit by rotating tactical overlays. Status. Novak did not look up. Thesari expected us to run out of breath first. We are replacing breath with machinery. Their attrition curve is steeper than ours by a factor of 3 and widening. Hayes gave a thin smile. I asked for status, not poetry. She allowed herself half a second of dry amusement. Status is excellent, Admiral. Poetry remains optional. At the edge of Pocket 7, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell's destroyer, TNS Caldera, took 2 glancing hits that shredded portside armor and knocked out a sensor mast. Before she could request withdrawal, a converted ore hauler slid alongside with indecent confidence, magnetic clamps biting hard enough to jolt her bridge crew. External cams showed civilian techs in pressure suits patching plates into place, while Caldera's guns kept firing through the vibration. Mitchell opened a secure line. Ore hauler Kestrel, you are inside active weapons envelope. A middle-aged voice answered over industrial noise. Copy that, Commander. We filed the hazard waiver and brought extra welders. Who authorized you this far forward? Your logistics doctrine did 3 years ago. Keep your bow steady for 40 seconds. Caldera returned to fighting before the Thesari wing opposite her finished reforming. By the time 23 minutes of combat had passed, the tide at Kepri had shifted from sharp shock to grinding asymmetry. Thesari ships still hit hard in direct exchanges, but each strike bought less. Terran losses that should have opened fatal gaps became temporary inconveniences. Destroyed drone racks were replaced from civilian stock. Burned-out coils were swapped by fabrication tenders under fire. Crews rotated through hospital corridors and came back to stations with stabilized hands and fresh tactical packets. Rask watched one human frigate die, then watched an almost identical hull emerge from asteroid shadow bearing the same squadron mark and join the line before his officers finished logging the kill confirmation. That vessel was destroyed, he said. His adjutant's voice had gone hoarse. Designation transferred. Replacement hull prepositioned with mirrored command stack. They treat ships as modules, not relics. Across the command pit, an older strategist from a vassal species assigned to Thesari liaison duty spoke before fear silenced him. Primus Captain, their fleet is distributed civilization. You are fighting dockyards, hospitals, transport unions, memorial trusts, and schools that teach emergency routing. Not just warships. Rask rounded on him. Are you giving me sociology while my cohorts burn? I am explaining why your target priorities are failing. Rask nearly ordered the liaison removed, then stopped. The explanation matched what his eyes were already forcing him to accept. He reopened channel to High Commander Spencer, this time with command precedence override. After a long delay, the flagship answered with compressed bandwidth and background alarms. Report, Spencer demanded. Rask kept his tone formal. Our advanced pockets remain separated by anchor fields. Human support architecture is integrated and adaptive beyond prior estimates. Civilian hulls are serving as live repair, medical, and munitions nodes. Attrition exchange no longer favors us. A pause, then Spencer's voice hardened. You are telling me clerks are defeating spear cohorts. I am telling you their clerks built a battle space where spear doctrine cannot close. Static crackled. Spencer said, Reassert HonorNet command discipline. collapse on designated dual axes, break their confidence with visible kills. Rask stared at the tactical pane where another Terran cruiser returned to firing after emergency repairs and answered with careful obedience. Acknowledged. Attempting regroup. When the channel dropped, his adjutant said, what no Thessari officer wanted spoken aloud. If we cannot break their logistics web, we cannot exhaust them. Rask looked at the widening constellation of Terran green icons and finally understood the first listing on the ledger had been a mask worn by choice. The second scene opened in the command sanctum of the Crown of Ash, where Primus Captain Severin knelt before a cracked hololith and tried to make old doctrine fit new data by force of will. His bridge had lost 2 relay officers and 1 navigation cluster to rail impacts. The wounded were silent, strapped in and breathing through analgesic masks, while technicians stepped around them with disciplined urgency. Severin replayed the opening phase 3 times. Human retreat. Thessari surge. Lane closure. Signal chaos. Then the same inflection point each time. Civilian signatures igniting into military function. We taught ourselves the wrong enemy, he said. His tactical priest stiffened. Primus Captain? We trained for dual fleets and heroic decapitation strikes. They trained for systems war. We keep seeking a throat to cut. They have none. Before the priest could answer, a priority packet slid through degraded channels carrying Spencer's direct command to all surviving cohorts. The language was absolute. Restore formation integrity. Ignore unauthorized recalls. Reestablish spear hierarchies. Punish hesitation. Severin barked a bitter laugh that carried no humor. Punish physics next, then punish time. Around him, officers pretended not to hear. He switched to inter-cohort channel, forcing composure into each syllable. All units in hearing range. This is Crown of Ash actual. New assumptions. Terran auxiliaries are combat multipliers. Do not treat civilian profiles as non-threat by default. If unable to verify, bracket and move. Prioritize anchor projectors and relay drones. We reform at Vector Cairn Delta 9. A captain from Cohort Ember replied with obvious strain. Delta 9 is inside a shear pocket now. We cannot hold there. Then give me a location you can hold. Silence. Then, quietly, we are trying to find one. Severin cut the line and looked to his navigator. Calculate regroup points outside anchor interference. Interference is not static, the navigator said. Human tugs are moving projectors between pockets. Safe points collapse after 2 to 4 minutes. Severin's claws tightened on the command rail. The Thessari strategy was built on stable geometry, ceremonial spacing, and linear authority. Every element at Capri mocked those assumptions. Orders arrived late or doubled. HonorNet authenticity seals still worked, which now made them liabilities because Terran cyber-linguistic teams had learned the ritual syntax well enough to inject urgent, legitimate-looking diversions at decisive moments. Cohorts disengaged to satisfy sacred protocol and re-entered battle in the wrong century. On the Vowbreaker, Rask faced the same fracture from another angle. He had just received 3 contradictory packets bearing identical lineage keys. One demanded immediate dual acceptance, one ordered retreat to protect sacred dead, and one elevated a junior officer to temporary command authority over ships 2 ranks above him. All 3 were technically plausible. None could be trusted. Quarantine HonorNet directives unless voice confirmed, Rask ordered. His comms chief hesitated. That violates combat liturgy. Rask spoke through clenched teeth. Liturgy is losing us ships. Quarantine it. The order traveled unevenly, but where it stuck, the Thessari response time improved by seconds, that might have mattered an hour earlier. Now, it merely slowed collapse. Human pressure remained patient. Terran line ships did not chase glory kills. They fenced pockets, cut exits, and fed continuous fire into exposed vectors, while converted auxiliaries denied every attempt to exploit damage. A Thessari destroyer pierced a Terran screen and crippled 2 frigates. Within minutes, a hospital tender had stabilized 1 crew. A fabrication barge had restored partial propulsion on the second, and a missile ferry had replaced expended munitions for the screen commander who never left station. From Severin's viewpoint, it felt like fighting weather that learned. 3 decks below the Crown of Ash Bridge, the Thessari enlisted crews gathered in emergency compartments and listened to public channels where council commentators had gone silent. No triumphant narration remained, only clipped tactical warnings and casualty rolls read too quickly. For the first time in many campaigns, the rank crews heard uncertainty in officer voices. A weapons sergeant asked, no one in particular, "How many humans are here?" A medic answered while sealing a fracture brace. "Enough." Up in Sol Command, Fleet Admiral Anderson watched the Thessari communications degrade from contempt to confusion, then sent a concise assessment to Hayes as prediction bands tightened across the operations wall. Enemy command culture is in doctrinal shock. They are still dangerous, but confidence in their next moves is increasing. They keep trying to restore a battle we already ended. Hayes read it, then opened fleet-wide command. Maintain tempo. Do not overextend. Their pride will keep offering targets if we leave them room to make bad choices. On Council Station, Ward received the same feed in a secure chamber where neutral observers now requested legal briefings instead of dismissing Terran objections as procedural theater. She said nothing for a long moment, then dictated 1 line for record transmission. Terran operations remain compliant with surrender law and medical corridor protections. This response continues until all unlawful incursions cease and seized personnel are recovered. Talre, pale and exhausted, appended his own authentication without being asked. Back at Capri, Rask finally linked a partial conference with Severin and 4 surviving cohort captains. Their holograms flickered, each feed scarred by transmission dropouts and battle damage. No one bothered with ritual greetings. Rask began. Assessment. Severin answered first. Initial assumptions are invalid. Terran capability includes distributed industrial warfare integrated with civilian infrastructure. Our spear doctrine cannot force decisive engagement under current anchors and cyber interference. Captain Ireth of Cohort Ember hissed agreement. We strike openings and they close before we reload. Another captain snarled. Then we burn the civilians. Rask turned on him. And confirm every accusation they made in council law. We are already fighting their fleets in half the galaxy's legal memory. You want to add moral isolation to tactical failure? The captain looked away. Severin exhaled slowly. We need regroup outside Capri and a clean command spine. If we remain segmented, we die segmented. Rask asked the question that tasted like surrender and hated himself for needing it. Can we disengage in order? No one answered immediately. At last, Severin said, with losses. Rask nodded once. Losses are now the price of learning late. He opened a channel to all reachable Thessari units, voice ironed flat by necessity. All cohorts, execute regroup protocol Obsidian Ladder. Break contact by echelon toward outer marker chain. Protect command relays, abandon isolated honor duels, preserve crews. Repeat, preserve crews. We reform beyond anchor density and resume coordinated action. Acknowledgements came in ragged bursts, some disciplined, some frightened, some cut off mid-syllable. Thessari ships began to pivot, not in triumphant spear geometry but in pragmatic fragments trying to survive a map written by an enemy they had called soft. Human formations shifted with them, measured and relentless, closing channels, testing flanks, refusing to be baited into vanity. The battle had not ended, but the myth had. In the broken lanes of Kepri, the primacy's certainty withdrew under fire, and for the first time in generations, the Sari commanders planned not for parade victory, but for whether they could still hold a line at all. Rask's obsidian ladder order was still echoing across damaged channels when Primus Captain Rask discovered that regrouping required a command language his fleet no longer possessed. His retreat columns tried to form echelon screens, but each maneuver packet arrived braided with counterfeit urgency marks that no Thessari officer could safely ignore. Cohort Ember broke left to answer a lineage challenge from a dead admiral. Cohort Slate throttled down to protect a sacred relay buoy that no longer existed. 2 escort claws reversed thrust in perfect obedience to a recall code that had been valid 3 campaigns ago and was now functionally a death sentence. Rask watched his map degrade from tactical geometry into ritual debris and finally accepted the scale of the intrusion. "Bridge to all surviving command hulls," he said, every syllable carved and formal. HonorNet is compromised at doctrinal depth. Disregard all dual summons unless authenticated by direct voice from known command. His communications chief flinched. Known command voices are being synthetically mirrored. Rask turned slowly. Then, the network has become a weapon. It has become their weapon, the chief corrected, too tired to pretend otherwise. Far from Kipri's firing corridors, in a shielded compartment aboard the Terran relay ship Argosy Spine, Commander Marcus Sullivan stood before a wall of live Thessari script streams and moved his hand across the display like a conductor, setting tempo. He did not look triumphant. He looked precise. Around him, linguists, historians, and signal engineers sat in concentric stations feeding one another validation keys, accent models, lineage trees, and ceremony grammars that would have seemed absurd in peacetime budget hearings. "Do not flood," Sullivan said. "Selective pressure only. We are not trying to silence them. We are trying to make certainty expensive." Analyst Ingrid Bergman pointed to 3 highlighted channels. "We have full semantic lock on combat liturgy variants in Spear cohorts 1 through 4. Their trust model weights urgency over source continuity whenever honor language cites ancestral witness." Sullivan nodded once. "Inject there. Challenge packets, priority recalls, jurisdiction conflicts. Keep each message doctrinally plausible and tactically inconvenient." A junior coder hesitated. "Commander, this level of authenticated mimicry is strategic identity breach. If we overrun the lattice, their whole military archive could collapse." Sullivan's answer carried no drama. "Then we do not overrun it. We induce friction, not erasure. Record every packet for tribunal disclosure. Law first, effect second." The first wave went out as liturgical argument, not static. Elite wings received simultaneous orders from equally sacred authorities, each one honorable, each one mutually exclusive. Squadron leaders spent 30 fatal seconds debating precedents while Terran destroyers redrew local odds. Then came targeted mercy corridors, false to Thessari systems but true to human intent. Fabricated ritual ceasefire windows nudged evacuation craft out of live fire vectors and into lanes Terran med teams had already opened. Where Thessari command culture expected binary obedience, human cyber-linguistic teams injected ambiguity with surgical discipline. By the end of the second combat hour, neutral observers monitoring encrypted spillover traffic stopped calling the phenomenon hacking and began calling it doctrinal inversion. On Crown of Ash, Primus Captain Severin received 6 direct voice orders in under a minute, all in Spencer's cadence, all carrying correct command pheromone tags, all giving different destinations. He cut his own comm stack, routed to short-range laser, and found that the adjacent cohort had done the same. The Sari Fleet Command had evolved for grand declarations. Stripped to line-of-sight improvisation, it moved like a giant trying to sew with gauntlets on. His tactical priest leaned close, voice barely contained. If we cannot trust command sanctity, what remains of hierarchy? Severin stared at a display where another cohort drifted out of position and into Terran crossfire because 2 captains had spent 40 seconds adjudicating ceremonial rank. Survival remains, he said. Start there. In sole command, Fleet Admiral Victoria Anderson read the same pattern and transmitted a narrow beam message to Ward and Hayes. Capability Threshold 2 is now visible to all major actors. The Sari Command Trust is fragmenting. Their firepower remains lethal, but coherence is dropping faster than projected. Ward answered from Council Station with a line, Tal Ray, immediately archived. Noted. Preserve evidence chains. The galaxy must understand this was not trickery for spectacle. It was response under law to unlawful aggression, Hayes added, and it works. Ward's reply was dry enough to cut steel. Competence often does. At Capri itself, human resolve looked less like speeches and more like people who refused to leave one another behind. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell's destroyer Caldera lost port maneuvering again when a Thessari lance sheared through her patchwork armor. Her ship yawed toward a collapsing shear pocket and would have spun into anchor lock if a civilian tug from the Kestrel Cooperative had not rammed coupling clamps into Caldera's stern and fired emergency thrusters in counter-vector. The tug's pilot, a woman named Anna Kowalski, with 40 years in ore lanes and no military rank at all, held the line while debris hammered her hull and said over an open maintenance channel, "Commander, your bowguns still track. Use them. I will complain about insurance later." Mitchell kept firing. Caldera's rail batteries cut down 2 incoming escorts. A hospital tender, lights dim to avoid attracting fire, slid under both ships and took aboard 23 wounded from mixed crews, human and Thessari alike, because triage algorithms did not care who had started the war. 3 decks up in the tender, Surgeon Commander Elise Wagner stabilized a Thessari gunner with thoracic fractures while speaking to him through a translator bead clipped to her collar. "You are in Terran medical protection. No one here is going to harm you. Breathe with me. Slow, then deep." The gunner's eyes narrowed in pain and suspicion. "Why treat enemy?" Wagner cinched a seal and did not look away. "Because dead enemies do not testify, do not surrender, and do not learn." That answer circulated far beyond the medbay. Thessari enlisted channels, stripped of polished propaganda, began to carry raw crew reports. Humans who fired without hesitation in battle and shared plasma in triage. Humans who jammed command nets and still announced evacuation corridors. Humans who boarded disabled hulls with rifles slung low and restraints ready, not blades raised for theater. The prevailing Thessari story of soft petitioners and timid clerks could not absorb those contradictions. Fear entered where contempt had lived. On Council Station, Valari Elder Irisel requested emergency speaking rights and received them over 3 objections from delegations that still preferred quiet collapse to public alignment. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied. "We rang funeral bells while your chamber argued grammar," she said, facing the full semicircle. "Now Terran medical craft are recovering our dead and are living from lanes your censure motions could not protect. We remember who came when law failed." A delegate from the Merchants of Pax asked, careful and calculating, "Are you requesting formal compact activation?" Irisel raised her chin. I am stating formal gratitude and immediate logistical support. Valari dry docks, fuel reserves, and sensor arrays are open to Terran and neutral relief operations effective now. Tal Ray stamped the declaration into permanent record. 2 neutral species followed within minutes, activating dormant defense clauses they had signed with humans decades earlier and never expected to invoke. Cargo convoys changed route tables in real time. Observation fleets shifted from passive witness to escorted humanitarian support. The balance did not flip in one thunderclap. It tipped through accumulated choices made by species that had watched long enough to decide where they stood. Rear Admiral James Hayes saw the new signatures appear at the edge of Kepri's tactical sphere and allowed himself a brief, unadorned sentence. So much for human isolation. Anderson answered, We were never isolated. We were patient. As the 3rd hour opened, Terran Command pushed from containment into design. Sullivan's team introduced the next layer of cyber-linguistic pressure. Not contradictory orders now, but authenticated maintenance directives that redirected Thesari relay drones by tiny margins, enough to open blind wedges in their sensor web. Human missile clouds entered those wedges with near-zero interception. Marine strike packets launched from stealth corvettes and rode the confusion to board 3 command relays in succession. They did not sabotage life support. They severed fleet synchronization, copied logs, and transmitted surrender law in flawless Thesari liturgical dialect before cutting away. Rask felt the consequence in his bones before he saw it on screen. His right flank went silent. Not destroyed, merely disconnected, each ship still armed but no longer sharing a war. He opened laser to Crown of Ash and got only fragmented static. He tried secondary command paths and found Terran decoy beacons occupying frequencies that should have belonged to his own relay chain. His adjutant whispered, Primus Captain, we are no longer a fleet. We are clusters. Rask gave the order he had sworn he would never give. All clusters prioritize crew survival over positional honor. Break from dual doctrine. Engage opportunistically, and conserve drives for strategic withdrawal. Around him, officers stiffened, as if struck. Thesari combat identity had been forged around visible courage and ritual commitment. Rask had just replaced both with pragmatism, which was another word for admitting the old framework had failed. In sole command, Hayes listened to the intercepted order and said to Anderson, He is adapting. Good, she said. Adaptive enemies surrender sooner than delusional ones. He glanced sideways. That is a cold comfort. It is still comfort. The turning point arrived without fanfare, inside a narrow corridor between 2 anchor wells where Thesari Command Cluster Sigma attempted a breakout and found 6 Terran task groups waiting on pre-computed vectors. Decoy carriers lured spear lances into gravitic shear bands. Autonomous missile swarms stripped escort screens in layered bursts. Then, rail batteries from 3 human cruisers executed cross-vector saturation fire that no surviving Thesari armor model had been designed to absorb from those angles. Sigma did not explode in cinematic ruin. It unraveled. Engines failed. Weapons went dark. Escape pods deployed under Terran cover protocols. The largest surviving command hull transmitted conditional surrender language and was answered with a single Terran phrase in formal Thesari. Unconditional terms preserve lives. Delay reduces options. By then, neutral monitors had full spectrum feeds. The whole galaxy watched the same data and reached the same conclusion. Human forces were no longer reacting to Thesari aggression. They were controlling the shape, pace, and legal framing of the war. On Council Station, Spencer remained absent from public chamber appearances, issuing statements through military proxies that grew shorter each hour. Ward requested direct channel and was refused twice. On the third attempt, the Thesari flagship answered with encrypted text carrying Spencer's crest. "State your demand." Ward dictated her response while Toll, Ray, and 3 neutral legal observers witnessed every word. "Withdraw all remaining armed elements from Volari Protectorate and Memorial Orbit. Broadcast surrender authentication across your surviving command lattice. Release crew manifests and detention coordinates for every seized civilian. Submit yourself and War Council officers for interspecies tribunal custody. Compliance preserves your surviving personnel." A long pause followed. Then came Spencer's reply. "You presume victory before final engagement." Ward's face did not change. "No, I recognize arithmetic." At Capri, Rask received a priority movement order from surviving High Command that finally carried verified biometric continuity and no ceremonial flourishes. All operational remnants were to consolidate at Ridgel's Gate under Spencer's direct authority for decisive action. No further piecemeal engagements. No more HonorNet theater. All remaining Dread Lances, command relays, and assault cohorts would stake the campaign there. He read the order twice and understood its meaning with perfect clarity. Kepri had ended the myth. Ridgel would decide the Empire. Across Terran channels, Hayes transmitted matching instructions with the same measured tone he used for logistics briefings and casualty updates. All groups maintain pressure and pursue by doctrine limits. Primary objective shifts to Ridgel's Gate. We finish this where they can no longer pretend the ledger was wrong. Human ships turned as one, Allied signatures sliding into escort formations beside them, medical corridors preserved inside the advance, like protected arteries. Behind, Kepri's shattered lanes still burned with drifting wreckage, rescue lights, and the evidence of a doctrine broken in public. Ahead, Ridgel's star rose on every tactical display, and both fleets moved toward the confrontation that would settle more than territory. It would settle which species had understood power all along. Ridgel's Gate was not a gate, so much as a wound in space that every navy pretended it could own. 3 collapsed moons orbited the star in broken crescents, their debris fields threaded with old transit beacons, smugglers' tunnels, and defense platforms from wars no one officially remembered. Spencer had chosen it because the Sari doctrine loved symbolic ground, and because a narrow approach could make a battered empire look whole for one final broadcast. When Terran and Allied formations dropped from transit, the answer waiting for them looked like a monument built from denial. 31 surviving Thesari capital hulls held a layered spear wall ahead of the gate corridor. Behind them, command relays floated inside armored cradles, each one wrapped in point defense rings and ceremonial standards still flying in vacuum. The vow breaker and crown of ash anchored the left and right flanks, scarred but operational. At the center sat Spencer's flagship, Primacy's Will, power signatures pulsing hard enough to be seen on civilian scope systems away. Spencer opened all channel immediately, voice amplified through distortion and pride. "Humans, you arrive wearing scavenged allies and clerk-made tricks. Good. Witness now what true warcast continuity means. At Kepri, you confused us with sabotage and ritual theft. At Ridgel, we stand in honest geometry. You will break against it as all petitioners break. Your ships will drift as examples. Your diplomats will sign what survives. This is the final correction." Admiral Anderson heard it from Sol Command and forwarded only one line to Hayes aboard the Terran flagship Resolute. "Proceed by plan. No deviations for theatrics." Hayes keyed a narrow beam to Ward at Council Station before the first shots. Final demand window closed. Ward, with Tal Ray and neutral legal observers at her shoulder, answered without hesitation. "Closed and recorded. Compliance was offered. Refusal was explicit. Execute. The Terran line did not answer Spencer's speech with another speech. It answered with choreography. Decoy carriers pushed first, broad profiles lit like command ships, driving straight at the center where Thesari spear doctrine expected courage to become stupidity. Spencer took the bait exactly as predicted. 2 dread lances surged forward to split them in ritual kill arcs. As soon as those arcs committed, hidden gravitic projectors buried inside the debris crescents woke in sequence. Not enough to trap whole fleets as at Kepri, just enough to bend local vectors by fractional degrees. Fractional degrees turned perfect spear timing into near misses into collisions, collisions into gaps. Through those gaps came autonomous missile clouds in disciplined layers, each wave configured for a specific job. Strip escort screens, blind local sensors, force point defense overheating, then peel away before heavy guns could swat them in bulk. Thesari batteries fired furiously and hit plenty, but every destroyed cloud was replaced by another launched from freighters that had looked unarmed 5 minutes earlier. The old joke about human cargo had become a tactical obituary. 90 minutes into the engagement, the battlefield no longer resembled any Thesari combat hymn. It resembled an ecosystem under Terran management. Sullivan's cyber-linguistic team pressed the honor net at exactly the same tempo as the missile cycles. Not saturation, precision. A lineage, recall here, an authenticated jurisdiction dispute there, a maintenance override that rotated a relay drone 12 degrees off axis at the worst possible moment. Thesari captains still fought with skill and ferocity, but they did so inside a command architecture that distrusted every urgent order unless voice verified, and voice verification now cost time they did not have. On Crown of Ash, Severin watched his outer escorts vanish under cross-vector railfire and did not waste breath pretending surprise. Independent Weapons Authority, he ordered. No delay for ritual concurrence. Fight the ships in front of you. His tactical priest recoiled. Primus Captain, that breaks liturgy. Severin kept his eyes on the plot, where human task groups flowed around his formation like water around stone. Then, liturgy can file a complaint when we are alive. Rask on Vowbreaker made the same choice from the opposite flank, and for 20 brutal minutes the Thesari resistance hardened. They punched through one Terran screen and crippled 2 allied cruisers from the Merchants of Pax escort. They nearly cut a corridor to the gate itself. For a narrow window, Spencer believed he had his decisive angle. He committed his reserve cohorts and roared over open channels for all fleets to hear. Now, Spear Ascendant now, drive through their center, break them where they count. Hayes had been waiting for that exact reserve commitment. He touched his command rail once. Release Black Lantern. From asteroid shadow beyond the crescent moons, the hidden reserve fleet emerged in ordered silence. Heavy rail platforms, interdiction destroyers, and marine carrier groups that had never appeared in Thesari estimates because they had never transmitted a peacetime signature. Allied compact squadrons from Valeri, Kith, and Lum peeled out with them, not as auxiliaries, but as pre-briefed equals slotting into Terran fire lanes they already knew. The galaxy had called human alliances sentimental. At Rigel, sentiment arrived with synchronized targeting solutions. The center collapsed for the Thesari, not in one explosion, but in cascading failures too fast to patch. Relay Cluster 9 went dark after Terran Marines boarded and cut synchronization trunks. Vowbreaker lost maneuver coherence when 3 rail strikes cored its port vectoring array. Crown of Ash took a gravitic shear along its ventral spine and dropped from spear alignment into drifting defense. Spencer's reserves entered what they thought was open center and found a layered kill pocket shaped hours before the first jump. Hayes finally opened broad channel, not for taunt, for declaration. His voice carried across military and civilian bands alike. "Hi, Commander Spencer, hear me clearly. For 2 centuries we have been patient, diplomatic, and precise. We accepted insult to preserve stability. We accepted delay to preserve law. We accepted mockery because words do not kill by themselves. You desecrated protected memorials, seized civilians, invaded a protectorate, and announced that restraint was weakness. You were warned in public, in writing, and under witness. You chose escalation at every branch. You wanted honest combat. This is honest combat. Logistics, memory, alliances, discipline, and consequences. Your fleet is operationally cut apart. Your command relays are compromised. Your surviving crews can live. Transmit unconditional surrender now to all Thessari channels, and this ends under law. Refuse, and what remains of your war cast ends by force within the hour. You chose this field. Choose your people." For the first time since the emergency session, Spencer did not answer immediately. He answered with weapons fire. Primacy's will discharged a full spinal lance at Resolute. The shot missed by less than a ship length and vaporized 2 drifting wrecks behind it. Hayes did not flinch. He gave one order. Decapitation ring. Non-nuclear. Preserve flag bridge if feasible. Terran and Allied batteries executed in 6 seconds. Interdiction destroyers severed Primacy's will from escort cover. Rail platforms punched through outer armor belts. Missile swarms stripped point defense nodes in layered bursts. Marine breaching torpedoes rode the final gap and latched along the flagship's command spine. White surrender strobes flickered once, died, then returned steady as internal fires overwhelmed secondary grids. Spencer had run out of ships before he ran out of fury. By the 5th hour at Rigel, organized Thessari resistance had ceased. Isolated clusters still fired in panic, then cut engines as surrender law transmissions reached them in their own liturgical dialect, authenticated by captured relays and neutral monitors simultaneously. One by one, Thessari hulls powered down weapons and broadcast compliance codes. The spear wall that had opened as monument ended as wreckage and drifting lifeboats under Terran escort. Hayes assembled Breach Team Actual in the forward lock of Resolute. 12 Marines in black-gray hard armor, 2 legal officers, 1 combat medic, and a full-spectrum recorder drone running redundant archive feeds for tribunal chain of custody. No one spoke loudly. No one needed to. They crossed to Primacy's will under white strobes and emergency beacons, magnetized boots thudding through smoke-thin corridors where dead power made every bulkhead look older than it was. They passed wounded Thessari crew who had already dropped weapons and raised open hands. Terran medics tagged them for extraction. A lieutenant from Hayes's team paused at a shattered hatch where enlisted sailors tried to free a trapped engineering officer. He keyed his cutter, helped lever the frame wide, then moved on. Discipline, not vengeance. The bridge doors of Primacy's will had been blown inward from both sides, one breach from internal overpressure, one from Terran charges. Inside, the tactical dais lay shattered, hololithic glass drifting in glittering sheets through partial gravity. Command consoles sparked and died in uneven rhythm. At the center stood Spencer, enormous, even hunched, one gauntlet still on his command blade, crest scorched dark at the edges. He looked at Hayes as if trying to decide whether to hate him or memorize him. Hayes lowered his rifle a fraction, muzzle still ready but no longer pointed at Spencer's chest. His voice was formal enough for the recorder and human enough for the room. "Hi, Commander Spencer, your fleet is destroyed. Transmit unconditional surrender and your surviving crews will live." Spencer said nothing for several breaths. Behind him, the surviving tactical hololith still rendered fragments of his armada, most icons grayed out, some blinking surrender green, many simply gone. He set the command blade on the broken dais with deliberate care, as though placing a relic in a tomb. "You boarded under law," Spencer said at last, voice roughened by smoke and exhaustion. "You fight like machinery and prosecute like archivists. I called that weakness." Hayes did not fill the silence. Spencer removed the crest insignia from his armor collar. The motion was small. In Thessari culture, it was the opposite of small. "You're listed twice because one face bargains and the other ends empires," he said. "I surrender to the second." Hayes nodded once to Legal Officer Becker, who stepped forward with a restraint band and biometric scanner. "Surrender accepted," she said for the record. "Identity confirmation in progress. High Commander Spencer, you are now under Interspecies War Tribunal custody. Your rights and charges will be transmitted in Thessari Standard and Council Trade." Spencer extended his wrists without resistance. The scanner chimed green. Chain of custody tags locked. Recorder drones captured every angle. Hayes opened shipwide channel on Primacy's will and routed it through captured relay trunks to every armed Thessari vessel still powered. "This is Rear Admiral James Hayes, Terran Sphere Navy. High Commander Spencer is in custody alive. His biometric confirmation is attached to this transmission. By his authority and under Council surrender law, all Thessari units will power down heavy weapons, maintain life support, and await escorted disarmament. Compliance preserves crews. Any further offensive fire will be treated as rogue action." He handed the channel to Spencer. The Thessari commander stood straight despite the restraints, pride still visible even after defeat. "This is Spencer," he said, each word forced through the weight of irreversible fact. "The campaign is ended. Obey surrender protocols. Preserve the living." Across Riggel's debris fields, the last scattered fire died. On Council Station, Ward watched the authenticated feed with Tal Ray and 3 neutral delegations beside her. No one cheered. The room was too tired and too aware of cost for Triumph Theater. Tal Ray stamped the surrender packet into permanent harmonics record with trembling hands. Ward exhaled once, then transmitted a final operational instruction to Hayes and Anderson. "Hostilities are concluded under surrender law. Begin casualty exchange, civilian recovery, and detention transfer protocols immediately." At Riggel's gate, Terran rescue lights spread through the wreckage in ordered lines while surrendered Thessari ships waited under guard, weapons cold, engines low. The battle that Spencer had promised would correct the galaxy instead rewrote it in real time with his own voice as the signature at the bottom. The first deliberate act after surrender was not a victory broadcast. It was a rescue lane. Within 20 minutes of Spencer's transmission, Terran traffic control painted Riggel's debris field with hard green corridors for lifeboats, med shuttles, and damaged hulls under tow. Weapons remained locked outward, not inward. On the triage deck of the hospital tender Nightingale Spine, Surgeon Commander Elise Wagner moved from a human rail gunner with thoracic burns to a Thessari reactor tech with shrapnel trauma, then to an allied pilot from Kith with a crushed arm, dictating identical priorities in the same steady cadence. When a Thessari petty officer tried to refuse analgesics and muttered that he would not accept charity from enemies, Wagner tightened the seal on his respirator and answered, "This is not charity. This is law, and you are alive under it." Rear Admiral Hayes stood in the observation gallery above triage with Spencer under guard beside him, restraints visible and dignity intact. Below them, Terran corpsmen cut away armor plates marked with the Spear Ascendant and stacked them in sterile bins next to human combat jackets, scorched by the same battle. Spencer watched for a long moment before speaking. "Your crews lost people to my fleet. They still treat mine first when the injuries are worse. Hayes kept his eyes on the deck. We told you at council what patience meant. You mistook it for softness. Do not mistake discipline for forgiveness either. Spencer inclined his head once, accepting the distinction without argument. 90 minutes later, a fresh test arrived. A damaged Thesari barracks station on the edge of Rigel's outer crescent lost containment in 2 reactor compartments and began venting atmosphere. Terran Tactical predicted it could be destroyed with 1 interdiction strike before any system's failure spread into nearby lanes. The same model also showed 367 non-combatant personnel still aboard and 219 wounded military crew trapped behind jammed blast doors. The efficient military answer was obvious and ugly. Hayes gave a different one. No strike. Dispatch breachers, engineers, and evacuation corvettes. Mark this as protected recovery. He switched to open channel so neutral monitors would hear every word. All units. We are not here to kill people who have already lost. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell took Caldera into the debris cloud with Anna Kowalski's Kestrel tug lashed to her flank like a stubborn shadow. Kestrel's hull still carried the faded salvage permit that had once made Rask laugh, now patched with Terran emergency authority tags and a handwritten note from logistics control that read, "Permit renewal pending. Do not argue with this vessel." Kowalski read it, snorted over comms, and said, "I expect reimbursement in full and a better coffee ration." Mitchell replied while threading the destroyer through spinning wreckage, "Submit the claim after we get these people out." They reached the station, cut through warped bulkheads, and pulled survivors in sequence, while Nightingale Spine handled triage surge without collapsing throughput. No one in the rescue chain asked which species had fired first at Rigel. They asked oxygen levels, fracture status, and transport priority. By local dawn cycle, all 19 seized merchant crew from Ward's original warning packet had been recovered from Thesari detention manifests, medically verified, and transferred to neutral custody for debrief before return. Charlotte Becker personally read each name against the first casualty report she had handed Ward days earlier and did not move to the next line until biometric confirmation cleared. 7 were exhausted and underfed, 12 were injured at varying levels, and all 19 were alive. Becker transmitted a short message to Ward. Manifest complete. No unresolved detentions. Ward read it in the council antechamber, set her old paper notes beside the message, and finally let herself close her eyes for one measured breath. 3 days after Rigel, the Interspecies Tribunal opened in full transparency under council vault glass. Talray, still pale but no longer trembling, called the chamber to order with legal citations that had once sounded decorative and now sounded foundational. Evidence chains were projected in sequence. Sullivan's team submitted every cyber-linguistic packet with timestamp, doctrinal basis, and targeting rationale. The defense could inspect all of it. Becker entered Spencer's crest insignia, command blade, biometric restraint log, and bridge recorder feeds from Primacy's will as physical exhibits, each tagged from capture through storage without a broken link. The Thesari War Council officers were present, represented, and allowed full response. No one was executed for spectacle. No one disappeared into secret custody. When Spencer was asked whether he contested surrender authenticity, he rose in restraint cuffs and answered in formal trade, and then in Thesari liturgical dialect for his own people. "I do not contest. I gave the order. The campaign ended under my voice." He then looked toward the Valarai delegation, where Elder Irisel sat wrapped in slate robes threaded with memorial crystal, and added, "Desecration of Memorial Orbit 19 was a command decision under my authority. Recorded against me alone, where possible." Irisel held his gaze and said, "It is recorded. Repair will also be recorded. The tribunal sentenced Spencer and surviving principal war planners to life detention under monitored labor and compulsory testimony in post-war dismantlement inquiries. The sentence was severe, public, and final. On the seventh day, council ratification of the settlement turned from abstraction into mechanics. The Thesari war caste structures were dissolved by binding charter. Dread lance production yards were converted to civilian fabrication under joint supervision. Slave levy systems were abolished and audited by neutral inspectors from LUM and PAX, with Terran logistics teams supporting extraction and relocation. Protectorate borders were restored beacon by beacon. Each beacon carried tripartite control keys so no single state could quietly rewrite maps again. Valerie Memorial Orbit reopened after Thesari labor brigades, monitored and paid under reparation statute, rebuilt shattered crystal reliquaries in silence, while Valari choirs rang funeral bells that this time were not interrupted by war drums. At the same session, Tal Ray introduced the revised species threat ledger. The chamber remained quiet all the way through the vote. Humanity stayed listed twice by unanimous consent, now with language no one laughed at. Tier 2, Cooperative Civilization, and Tier Omega, Retaliatory Deterrent. The annotation, drafted jointly by neutral and allied blocs, entered permanent record in 12 legal dialects. Both tiers describe one polity. Cooperative posture is primary. Catastrophic response follows verified threshold breach. Ward read the final text, uncapped the same pen she had aligned at the start of the crisis, and signed Terran concurrence. She then placed that pen in a clear archive case requested by council historians as an artifact of the warning that had been offered before the war began. By the second month of reconstruction, former battle lanes were crowded with cargo again, but the traffic looked different. Mixed escorts of Terran, Valeri, and Kith vessels shepherded relief convoys through Rigel and Kepri under beacon law that every captain could audit in real time. Novak's distributed sustainment protocols were adopted as interspecies emergency doctrine, taught with ruthless practicality at new academy exchanges. One lecture hall on Valeri Prime used a freeze frame from Kepri, showing the so-called maintenance tug opening into a repair lattice as the foundational image for the patience doctrine course. The caption beneath it read, "Logistics is moral intent made durable." 2 years later, Hayes visited Memorial Orbit 19 in full dress uniform and no escort beyond standard protocol. Crystal reliquaries drifted in restored arcs around Valeri Prime, catching sunlight in clean bands that looked almost like the old prism light of the council chamber. A Thesari civilian work crew, no armor and no war crests, completed final calibration on preservation pylons under Valari supervision. Nearby, a small marker listed the names of all species dead in the campaign, ordered by date rather than faction. Hayes stood before it until his comm chimed with a routine operations report from Kestrel Cooperative. Insurance claim resolved in full, with interest plus coffee allotment approved by unanimous logistics board vote. He allowed himself a brief, tired smile and sent back one line. Deserved. In the final session of the cycle, Talray closed the war docket and opened the Peace Infrastructure Register. Ward attended remotely from Earth Orbital, Anderson from Sol Command, Novak from a freight habitat, now designated a permanent disaster response node, Sullivan from a joint ethics panel that governed cyber doctrine disclosure, and Becker from tribunal archives where every exhibit from Primacy's will remained accessible under public review rules. Iricel spoke for the Valeri and formally declared their world secure. No delegation challenged the declaration. Night settled over Rigel's Gate without weapons fire. Relief ships crossed the old kill zone in orderly streams, running dark green corridor lights and civilian transponders that no one dared spoof anymore. Mixed patrols held distance, vigilant and calm, while rebuilt beacons blinked in synchronized intervals across the debris fields where an empire had broken its own mythology. The galaxy did not remember humans as petitioners after that. It remembered the species that offered law first, force second, and kept both promises to the letter.